In this lecture, we're going to go and have a look on the high security level, and we'll see why it's uninjectable. So let's go ahead first and set the security level to high. And now I'm going to go back to my SQL injection. And let's make sure that the page works first. So I'm just going to put number 1 like we always did. And as you can see now, the page works. Now let's try to inject it after the ID parameter like we always did. And I'm going to put and 1 is equal to 1. So I'm putting a true statement. And as you can see now, the page doesn't really work. So let's try to put a single quote here to close it like we did with the low level. And again, this injection doesn't work either, even though we're given a true statement that shouldn't interfere with the current request. We usually don't look at the code when we're trying to hack, but as I said, this is uninjectable. So let's have a look on the code, and we're going to compare it with the code used for the medium security level, and we'll see what's the differences between the two codes so that we can learn how to secure our websites. So I'm going to change the security level to medium here, just so that we can compare the two codes. And I'm going to go back to the SQL injection, and I'm going to view the source as well. I'm going to put them beside each other. So in here, in the medium security level, you can see that the ID is being read in here, and it's been stored in the ID variable. And then they're using a function called mysql real escape. So what this function does, it'll go through every character in the ID variable, and it'll look for special characters such as single quotes and double quotes and remove them. Therefore, any quotation marks used or injected in the ID variable will actually be removed at this line because of the use of the mysql real escape string. Now the thing is, once we go down to the SQL statement, you'll see that we actually don't need to use any quotes to inject code into this statement. So our statement is select first name, last name from users, where user ID is equal to ID. So we actually don't need to close any quotes. We don't need to inject quotes in the ID variable. All we have to do is just put any ID like we did in the last video. So we can put just number 1 and then inject code straight away after the number 1. So when we use this code right here, we're basically, we didn't use the quote in the medium. So we're literally just giving the ID as number 1. And then we're saying union select column name, whatever, from information schema tables. So the code is just being injected straight away after the ID. And then the database will read it and execute it. No need to use quotes again because the code doesn't use any single quote. So the code just says user ID is equal to ID. Now comparing this with the code that we have for the high security level, you'll see that it uses the same function to skip special characters, but it's implemented in the right way. And that's by using single quotes in the SQL statement around the ID. Therefore, because the code is skipping the quotes that we put, and because they're using quotes in there, any code that we try to inject in here will actually be considered as if it's part of the ID. So when we use this code right here, so if we just use the code as it is without a quote, then obviously it'll just be inserted instead of the ID variable between the two single quotes. So it'll just be considered as the ID. Whereas if we inject that code in here, it'll actually be executed as part of the SQL statement. So let's have a look on what the SQL statement will look like when we inject our code in both in the medium and in the high security level. So I'm just going to bring down the text here. So we have the SQL statement for the medium here, and the SQL statement for the high security level. And we'll just try to inject and 1 is equal to 1. Because as we've seen, if you can inject that, then you can inject anything you want really and get it executed on the database. Okay, so looking at the medium statement, we're going to copy this code. Now this code will actually go and pass through the mysql real escape character. So it will be removed from any single quotes that it has, but it has nothing. And the code will look like 1 and 1 is equal to 1. So this statement is valid, and 1 is equal to 1 will be injected. Now looking at the high security level, Notice this use of the single quotes, which will mean that the user ID is equal to 1 and 1 is equal to 1. So and 1 is equal to 1 will not be considered as part of the SQL statement, but it will be considered as part of the user ID. Now let's try to add the single quote and see what effect would that have on the SQL statements. I'm actually going to get rid of this statement because we managed to inject it, and we're only going to focus on the statement used in the high security level. So we're using a single quote here to close it, and we're going to copy this. Now this will actually pass through the MySQL real escape string. So the single quote that we're using here will actually be removed, and this line will become 1 and 1 is equal to 1. So it's going to be equal or exactly the same as the line we used before. Now once this is substituted in here, again the 1 and 1 is equal to 1 will be considered as part of the user ID, and it won't be considered as part of the SQL statement. From this we can see that the use of the MySQL real escape string is not enough. It has to be used with the single quotes right here, and combined with that function, then this specific SQL statement becomes uninjectable. Now in future lectures we're actually going to discuss a better way to build web applications so that they can't be injected with SQL statements. But if you needed a quick solution, then you can go for this until you have time. Then you can change the implementation of your website so that it can't be injected.